My name is Paula, and I'm on YouTube because I like to ramble about being an INFP, like some of the things that come with that, and also because I love writing. Like, those are some of the books that I've written, and this is a book my cousin wrote that I helped her publish. But anyway, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, I like to just talk about writing and all of the nuances that come with it. But today I wanted to talk about something else because it's really been on my mind lately. And that topic is victim versus survivor. So I worked in the news industry for a long time, not anymore. And when I say a long time, honestly, it was like 6 years. So I guess that's not that long. So I worked in the news industry for about 6 years, maybe a little bit longer. And one of the things that would always stump me is when I was writing about a crime, like a brutal crime especially. And when I was reading the police report, because what a lot of writers have to do is you have to take these police reports, which are uh, agonizing to read, and then like transform it into something that's a little bit more palatable for the average reader. So in other words, you're going to try not to put as much of the brutality that's in the police report in the news report. But one of the things I noticed is in the police report, the officers would appropriately refer to the person who had been targeted by a criminal as a victim. But I always felt bad about using the word victim. And so I would often change it to, in my writing for the regular reading audience, I would change it to survivor. But then there were times when the word survivor simply did not fit because even though the person did survive, it's almost like what they went through, it was just more appropriate to say victim. And the reason I'm talking about this is because in our society today, well, let me start over. There's two sides to every story. And I understand the mindset of a person who has been through something horrible, whether it's a crime, whether it's a chronic illness, or just something terrible that has just battered them. And because they want to pull themselves back up from the pit that, from the, what felt like a pit that they fell into, they don't want to view themselves as a victim. And I've been through this. Um, I've experienced that, trying to pull myself back up from post-traumatic stress because of something horrible that has happened that you had no control over. And so a lot of times people who've been through that don't want to call themselves a victim, but they want to call themselves a survivor because that's what they are. They are someone who is pushing through and surviving. And that makes perfect sense to me. Perfect sense. But then there are people who have not been through that and who sort of point the finger at people who have been through tough situations and say things like you're making yourself a victim and kind of insist that this person be a survivor and not a victim. And when it comes to that, I feel like there is something very wrong there. Because the fact of the matter is, just like in those police reports, the officers correctly refer to people who have been raped or robbed or beaten up or shot. They correctly refer to those people as victims because that is what they are. Something happened that most of the time they had no control over. And they had to live with those physical and emotional scars. That's what being victimized is. So it is not inappropriate for that person to feel like they're a victim, um, or to call themselves a victim. Now, when it comes to like being a survivor, yes, that's a very good thing. And I think it's good when a person who has been victimized gets to the point in their recovery where they can view themselves as a survivor. But that's not automatic. I think it can be compared to grief. Excuse me, I'm just like burping in the middle of my YouTube video. Sorry. But I think it can be compared to grief. Everyone grieves in different ways, and everyone has their own amount of time that they go through the worst part of grief. No one can say, oh, okay, you have 1 day to grieve or you have 6 months to grieve. No, it's different for everyone. And most of us know that when someone is grieving, you leave them alone. Not leave them alone as in don't check on them, but you let them go through what they need to go through. Why? Because they are a victim. They're a victim of losing something that meant, or losing someone that meant the world to them. And that's like having a limb cut off or part of your heart taken out of your chest. So we feel empathy for them and we're like, they're grieving. They can be as weird as they need to be for a little while because that's just what happens when you lose something. People who have had crimes committed against them, against their will, people who have been through horrible chronic illnesses, which is, it almost feels like having a crime committed against you, that can fall into the category of grief too. Because you're losing, when that happens to you, you lose the you that you once before, the version of you that you feel was stronger. You've lost that. And now, from now on, you have to figure out how to live your life with a pain that you don't fully understand and with fears that you don't fully understand. Because when something horrible happens, quite naturally, you're afraid that it's going to happen again. And you start to take measures to make sure that doesn't happen again. And some of those measures might be like OCD or things that aren't quite, that seem abnormal. But it's not really abnormal, it's just you trying to protect yourself. In other words, what I'm trying to say is your life completely turns upside down when something tragic happens to you. So you do go through grief because you're grieving or you're sad that you've lost the life that you once had without all of these extra sad trappings, if that's the right phrase. Yeah, you've lost a lot. So when a person is going through that, it's okay for them to view themselves as a victim. And it is wrong for other people to point to them and say, you're making yourself a victim. Well, yeah, they are, because they are a victim. Let them be a victim. And I think that's actually an important step in recovery. I mean, I'm no doctor, but it just seems like the first thing you have to do in order to recover and get through something traumatic is accept the fact that it happened. That means accepting the fact that you were victimized or something happened to you that was completely out of your control, and now you're having to pick up the pieces. Accepting that means accepting the fact that you are a victim. And maybe that means talking to other people who are victims and figuring out how did they get through this? What do they have to do on a daily basis to feel okay? And then slowly you start to view yourself as a survivor. But it never helps for people to point the finger at someone who's been through something horrible and say, you need to pick yourself up and stop being a victim. So, yeah, I think that it's difficult for us. I know when I was younger, it was difficult for me to put myself in someone else's shoes who had, for example, a chronic illness. Like sometimes friends of mine who had illnesses that weren't physical, as in you could see it. Um, I didn't understand why they wouldn't like want to come do things with me or whatever. I thought that they were just lazy. And of course, I would never say that to them because I didn't want to be rude. But in my head, I kind of roll my eyes and be like, okay, here we go again. They're being lazy, making themselves a victim. But now that I'm older and now that I have like it feels like 3 billion chronic illnesses. It's really just three though. Um, but now that I've been through that and it's been absolutely horrible and life changing, now I'm like, I completely get it. And I was a moron back then for assuming that people were making themselves victims. I should have been more empathetic. But sometimes I think you have to go through things yourself, unfortunately, to really understand and have true empathy for other people who are who have experienced similar things. So, I don't know, what do you think about that? Like, what are your thoughts on victim mentality? Like, I do understand when people talk about that and say, like, someone who they feel does not have problems tries to constantly make themselves the victim, that it can be annoying. I do understand that, but I also think that instead of just quickly labeling people and saying, oh, they have a victim mentality, it might be good to explore that a little bit and try and figure out why that person views themselves as a victim, because maybe they actually are. Um, I don't know. And though it can be irritating to deal with if you if you have a friend like that, it's if you really care about someone, it's good to make an effort to try and understand them. Um, as long as they're a healthy person to be around, as long as they're not being like abusive to you in some way. So that's all really that I wanted to talk about today because it has been on my mind a lot lately. The victim versus survivor language, I guess you could say, and what's more appropriate. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And I'm sorry that I was like intermittently burping throughout this video. Uh, hopefully nobody noticed that. I am a victim of my burps. Okay, bye.